Good morning and welcome back to another study through this series, Party On. So grateful that you're along with us for the journey as we look at the different places in Scripture where there is food mentioned, where there is feasting mentioned, where festivals and fellowship are mentioned, and there are a lot of them in the Bible. Surprising, I know, but God is a God who seems to prefer to do his work around the table. And so it's no surprise that as we walk through several passages here in the book of Luke, that we should see Jesus, who is God, spending an inordinate amount of his time around the table. But today, what we come to is a table where there is an unexpected and uninvited guest. Before we get there, though, I want to remind you that just now, 2 days from today, I'll be in Cleveland, Ohio. And so will Sally, so will Maggie, who does music for us on Sundays and is an integral part of our community here. And we would love to invite you to be along with us there in Northeast Ohio. If you're anywhere in that area, Western PA, we'd love to have you come and be a part. We're going to be at the Euclid Avenue Pool Pavilion, which is not in Euclid, Ohio, which is closer to downtown Cleveland. It's actually in Willoughby, Ohio, 11 a.m. Don't need to let us know you're coming, but would love for you to come and join us. There'll be food there. Maggie's going to play a little bit of music. We'll sit around tables, and it'll be great. I'll bring a short message on the Party On devotional text for that day, and it'll be an opportunity for you to get to know a lot of the other people who are a part of Christ's Table, and many of them who comment each and every day on our content. So if you'd like more information about that, you can visit christtable.today, our website. And if you'd like more information about who we are and what we are all about, that is the place that you should go as well, christtable.today, because all of this that we produce, all of this that we accomplish is only in thanks to our generous donors who make an effort to help support this ministry and all that it is accomplishing. Now, in return, one of the things that we do is we just give as much away as we can. And so for anybody who donates to christtable.today in the month of June, we are going to send this book. It is a book that's going to dovetail amazingly well into what we've been doing here in this Party On Bible study. And I am fully aware that I'm holding up the wrong side of this book here because I kind of want it to be a surprise. Now, you could probably do a little zooming and screen capturing in Google search and figure out what it is. And it's not a big deal if you do, but I'm sending this book in the mail, probably second week of June. Middle of June, you'll receive this as well as several other goodies in the mail. All those people who are donors to Christ's Table, we're sending this to you all for free. And we're going to take a bit of a sabbatical month in the month of July. So the Bible studies will change up a little bit. We're going to work through this book. We're going to have some other podcasts and conversations and discussions and things. So it's summer. And we're going to take a bit of a break from our rhythm and create this new rhythm for 6 weeks or so. And so look forward to sending you that. You can donate right now, today, at christtable.today. And you can also sign up for our email list there. We send out an email about once a week, let you know what's going on. So why don't we, without any further ado, go ahead and jump in here to Luke chapter 7, where Jesus has been invited to be a guest at a meal. It's interesting that Jesus would be invited to be a guest at a meal of one of the Pharisees. By and large, the Pharisees wanted to have, as a religious leadership group, absolutely nothing to do with Jesus, because Jesus was bringing new ideas and he was bringing a lot of light onto the rituals and rhythms that they expected people to keep. And Jesus was pointing out those places in which the expectations that they had of religious people in that day were not from God and were not helpful for their spiritual health. And so the Pharisees and Jesus become a bit like oil and water. They don't mix. And so it's interesting. We don't know why this Pharisee invited Jesus to the table. We've said that inviting someone to the table was a sign of acceptance and was a sign of hospitality and fellowship that meant approval. Now, it could well be that this Pharisee is on the fence, that he's still checking Jesus out to see whether or not the party line against Jesus is one that he can subscribe to or not. So it may well be that that's what is going on. It could also be that he already knew that he was not in agreement with Jesus, and so he's just inviting him in order to try to entrap Jesus in something. He's going to get his chance if that's the reason. First century, oftentimes meals and dinners like this were public affairs. Everybody in the community, homes were more open than they are today, and so people could come in and come out during dinner and meal times, and oftentimes meals like this would be kind of a public forum for conversation, and so people could come and watch and listen and overhear. The front door would be open, and so they could sit on the outskirts of this, but there were still rules in place for that. So when one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him, Jesus goes. Jesus goes into his home and he sits down to eat. When a certain immoral woman from that city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. And I actually have had the privilege of picking up an alabaster jar filled with the likely perfume that was in it. It was spikenard. This, in those days especially, was an extremely expensive perfume, as well as the box that was in it. And so this was a woman of means, perhaps, though unlikely because of the fact that she stated as being immoral. Probably this is an inheritance, or this is her family's inheritance that she's essentially wrapped up in this in order to protect the money. But it would have been extremely expensive, likely a year's worth of wages. And so she shows up with an alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. Now, showing up, even just being a woman, is uncharacteristic, and it's a social faux pas. But her showing up with being a reputation for practicing an immoral lifestyle was even worse to meet these heads of religious organizations, a Pharisee and a leading rabbi, Jesus, but then to kneel behind him at his feet weeping. What's going now through everybody's head is probably that Jesus has also done something immoral with this woman, and she is outing him. That would probably be the first thought here. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. It's hard for me to go too far in describing how intimate this act is. This is not only crossing a line, this is absolutely, completely, and fully inappropriate behavior for the customs of the day. That her hair is down and not pulled back is a sign that she is a loose woman, that she has no inhibitions, that she is dishonoring and disrespecting Jesus. The fact that she is kissing his feet and putting perfume on his feet, the feet were very erotic parts of the body because so much of the clothes covered so much of the body in those days. The feet were what shone through, and in those days, any touching or any anything to do with the feet was really, honestly, is kind of a euphemism. In fact, in the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, we have this moment in there where Ruth and Boaz are essentially touching feet, which likely, almost assuredly, means that they were having sex. And so what we have here is an immoral woman who has shown up to a very high level feast, dinner, meal of conversation, has let down her hair, has begun touching a rabbi, weeping around him, kissing his feet, putting perfume on them. This is an act in which everybody in the room would have been aghast over. This is happening in plain view in public at a meal. So when the Pharisee who had invited Jesus sees this, he says to himself, this isn't out loud, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. And so this kind of confirms in many ways what he was either hoping to prove or hoping to disprove, but it is that Jesus is a partier, that Jesus is a glutton, that Jesus is more about eating freely and drinking freely than he is prayer and fasting, and that Jesus is spending way too much time with the wrong crowd, eating good food with bad people. She's a sinner. And then Jesus, though, answers his thoughts out loud. Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. And I've often thought, if Jesus were to use that line, Kevin, I have something to say to you, how would I feel? What would I be worried about? What would make me begin to sweat? And I wonder for you as well, if Jesus were to say to you, I have something to say to you, if he's qualifying it, I do this with my kids. All right, I have something I'm going to say to you, or somebody who has a friend or somebody, in the congregation who's maybe crossed the line or something in some way, I have something that I need to say to you. Whenever you qualify something like that, that what follows is not going to be easy to hear. Now, here, I'm not going to go into that. I actually want you to finish the reading here, the last, 9-10 verses on your own. So I'm going to pick up a Bible, go to Luke chapter 7 and finish the readings here so that you can hear the rest of this story as to what happens, because it's pretty incredible what happens around this table. But there are a few things that I want to point out about what we've read, and it will help characterize what you're going to read. And the first is this. When you invite random people over for dinner, awkward things are going to happen. So my mind, and probably your mind as well, first went to the woman who was invited over for dinner. And when you invite people over for dinner like that, awkward things are going to happen. She wasn't invited over for dinner. It actually is Jesus who is invited over for dinner. He is the random person to the Pharisee that is invited over for dinner. And awkward things happen because Jesus is there. And awkward things probably would have happened whether or not the immoral woman showed up, because Jesus was always utilizing everything that was at his disposal in order to help wake people up. I love I love that people hate the word woke. I'm like, why is that a deal? Jesus was always waking people up. I know you see it as derision, but so did the Pharisees as well. The Pharisees also saw Jesus's wokeness, or waking people up, as being wrong. So essentially, every time you deride somebody for being woke or waking up to something, you're calling yourself a Pharisee. So whenever you invite Jesus into something, there is going to be an awakening that occurs. And so whenever you invite Jesus into your presence, strange things are going to happen. Awkward things are going to happen. And that is what we are supposed to utilize the table for. We're supposed to utilize the table to invite random people, to invite people who are not being invited into any other home or around any other table to be a part. And awkward things are going to happen. And that's okay. If you're having a potluck at church and random people show up and it gets awkward, you're sitting in good company with Jesus. If you're in your home and you throw a dinner party and somebody invites somebody else who shows up and it gets a little awkward, you're in great company with Jesus. In fact, I have found that in those moments, perhaps are the most holy and sacred and life-transforming moments. Don't try and box out the awkwardness. Don't try and keep at arm's distance the awkward people. You never know what will happen. Just like this Pharisee, for whatever reason, allowed this woman into his home, and something awkward happened. But the rest of the story is amazing. The other thing that I would say is the Pharisee here immediately judges the woman. He judges her intent. He judges her actions. He judges her. And in so doing, he also is judging Jesus as a part of this. And Jesus told his followers not to judge. Oh, to the good Lord Jesus in heaven, if I did not ever have to have another conversation with some Christ follower who believes that it's their responsibility to judge other people on the basis of truth. Well, this book says it. My paper pope here says this, and so you're doing it wrong. So you can either get right or go to hell. Jesus was clear about telling us over and again not to judge, not to condemn people, not to reject people. Why? Not because what they're doing is wrong, not because what they're doing is right, but because you're doing wrong by doing it. Criticism builds barriers and it separates people from one another. Jesus said, love your neighbor. He didn't say, love your white conservative neighbor who thinks and acts and votes just like you. No. He said, love your neighbor. There are a lot of awkward people who are unlike us in neighborhoods. You never know all the facts. You have no idea who is moral and who is immoral in God's eyes. So many people whom you and I judge are closer to God and more moral in their sin than you and I are. Why are they worse than you? Why is what they're doing unworthy of communion? Why is what they're doing publicly sinning and not turning, when you, by judging, are also publicly sinning and not turning from your sin? Not to mention all of the other hidden list of sins that you also are continuing to do. Stop it. You can never know all of the facts. There is only one person who does, and it is not you or I. We got to take our plank out of our own eye first. And when we do, we'll be able to see. Whenever we remove the plank from our own eye, we will be able to see people for who they truly are. We will appreciate their awkwardness. We will look at their sin and say, I get it. I've got my own issues too. But we're still neighbors, and I'm called to love you, and I hope you can love me too. You see, that's the deal. We have trouble loving others, but can you imagine how hard you are to love? How hard I am to love? I know I'm hard to love. I need to talk to my wife. She overlooks those things. Maybe you should do some overlooking as well. And finally, Jesus doesn't see what others cannot see. Jesus sees what others refuse to see. The Pharisee here, it wasn't as though he couldn't see. that she was human. It wasn't as though he couldn't see that she had worth and value. It wasn't as though he couldn't see that she was a child of God. It wasn't as though he couldn't see that wherever she was and whatever she was doing had a long road that brought her there to that. It wasn't as though he couldn't see those things. It was that he refused to see those things. It was that he refused to see her as a human being. It was that he refused to see her as a human being that had value. It was because he refused to see her as anything but a sinner, thus implying he was not. It wasn't that he couldn't see all of those things. It wasn't as though he couldn't see her the way Jesus saw her. It was that he refused to. And so it's not as though Jesus is seeing what others can't see in people. It's that Jesus is seeing what others, you and I, refuse to see in other people. Don't use the table as a weapon. And don't use the table as a prize. Use the table as a tool to teach yourself, myself first, and then others, that God is love, and that whenever we are truly following him, we are loving as well, even to the awkward people. Chief of whom among those awkward people is us. Until tomorrow.